Today, we become legends.
Have you ever wondered which single Pantheon in SMITE can create the most competitive Conquest team? Is it just the largest Pantheon, Greek, or do some smaller Pantheons have powerhouses that can make or break a team? Well, in this video we're going to answer that question once again. I made this same video back in 2020, but a lot has changed since then. Many Pantheons have gotten new additions, the meta has changed a ton, and one specific Pantheon actually qualifies now that they didn't before, as they have 5 gods available. Can you guess which one? Leave a comment down below. So some basic ground rules before we jump in. Number 1, we're looking to create the strongest Conquest team for the current meta. Number 2, we need a god to fill every Conquest role effectively, so no 5 mage teams or anything silly like that, but I do plan on remaking my best team for every class video, so drop a like if you want to see that. Number 3, synergies will be taken into account when drafting these teams. And number 4, in a change from last time, I decided to allow all the Pantheons that have less than 5 gods available to draft their own team from their collective pool, so we can include smaller Pantheons that only have 1 or 2 gods in them. But without further ado, let's craft our teams, and then we'll pit them against each other in a tournament elimination bracket to see which Pantheon truly has the best team. So first up, the new kids on the block, the Celtic Pantheon. With the addition of Cleaner in 2021, it now has 5 gods available, which they didn't for the previous entry. This team is obviously pretty simple to draft, as we just have to put these 5 gods into reasonable Conquest roles, and it works surprisingly well given the Celts actually have 1 of each god class. So Kernanos goes to ADC, Artio goes to support, the one sort of not ideal pick here, Cleaner goes to jungle, Cuchulainn to solo, and Morrigan to mid. Considering the small size of the Pantheon, the Celts have done pretty well here, with a great ADC, mid and jungle. Cuchulainn is passable in solo too, and their only real weak point is the Artio support, but it can work. Good luck in the bracket, Celts. Let's move on to the Chinese team. So a much larger Pantheon for the Chinese, as we have 15 gods to choose from here, so in theory we should be able to eliminate some bad choices for the meta and get a strong offering, as opposed to Celtic, which just kind of had to take what they can get. So for mid, I think the most obvious choice for the current meta is Hebo. His usage of Bountiful Bow catapulted him into the meta recently, and while he has taken a couple of nerfs, he still does Hebo things and can one-shot almost any squishy he wants to in the late game. For the jungler, there are a few solid choices like Daji, Nasha, Erlang, and Hebo, but we have him in mid, so I think the overall strongest jungler for the Chinese at the moment is Aokwang. His damage output is insane, the execute is really nice to have, and I think he's just overall the best for the meta at the moment. For solo, it's sort of a no-brainer. Sun Wukong is pretty much the uncontested best solo laner at the moment, so we're going with him. He does everything you need really well and is simply better than other options like Mulan, Guan, or Erlang. Support is actually a little dicey, as believe it or not, the Chinese Pantheon only has 1 Guardian in Xingqian. There are a couple of other sort of viable supports like Guan or Naja though, and honestly, I feel like Naja fits this current team comp better. His ult combines with Hebo insanely nicely, and he can even combine with Aokwang to pick someone off and get them low for an execute. Plus he's physical, which helps a little bit with bumping up the physical damage output of this team, given that we went Aokwang for jungle. So Naja support it is. Which leaves one more choice, our Chinese ADC. There aren't really any top meta choices for China here, but they do have Hu Yi and Jing Wei, who are both solid. I think overall Jing is the stronger meta pick and will help with safety in lane, as this team is more so looking to get to the late game or play around mid and solo rather than the duo lane. So that's our Chinese roster. Hebo mid, Aokwang jungle, Wukong solo, Naja support, and Jing Wei ADC. A very solid team overall with top meta picks in 3 roles and a duo lane with good synergy. But moving on to a fairly large Pantheon, we have the Egyptians. We'll kick things off in the support role, since this one is very interesting with a lot of potential picks. All 3 Guardians in Sobek, Khepri, and Geb, as well as Horus and Iset, are all viable supports here. It's quite hard to choose between Khepri and Horus, who are both amazing and do different things, but I decided on the Birdman since I have plans for an aggressive dive team for the Egyptians, and I think he fits very well for it. So next up, let's grab our ADC, where there's a few choices on the table. Anhur and Neith are the obvious hunter picks, but Set is also a plenty viable ADC. However, I want Set somewhere else on this team, and I think Anhur is just better than Neith in the current meta and combines with Horus for an aggressive kill lane and duo. Pillar Impale off of Horus's stun knock-up engage can be absolutely deadly. But speaking of Set, he's going to be our jungler for the Egyptians. This guy can basically play 4 roles effectively, so we could have put him nearly anywhere, but I think jungle fits him best for the team. And that's because I did want a magical mid here, since we already picked Horus in the support role, and a quad physical team, while workable, isn't ideal, and to be honest, it's hard to pass up on Thoth mid in this current meta. He's really strong, has incredible range to follow up on Set on Horus's dives in teamfights, and fits perfectly in this comp. And finally, finally, let's round things out with our solo laner. There's a few choices available, but all things considered, I think Osiris works great for us here. He's pretty strong after the buffs and dives hard, which combines nicely with Set and Horus. Also got some nice lore aspects going on there. So there you have it, the Egyptian team. Horus and her duo lane, Set jungle, Thoth mid, and Osiris solo. Again, a really strong competitive team with great synergy and top picks in 3 roles. Excited to see how these guys stack up later on in the bracket. But the game continues as we reach our largest pantheon in SMITE, the Greeks. With such a large roster, we should have plenty of top picks available to make a pretty insane team here. So first things first, the Greeks actually don't have any super insane mid laners at the moment. Sure, they have the likes of Poseidon, Persephone, Scylla, Hera, etc., but none of these are really top meta compared to like Hebo on the Chinese team or Thoth for the Egyptians. So I decided for the Greek team, we'd rock the Matikaras in mid as he's insanely strong. But who does that leave us for the ADC role? Well, a lot of good options, but no super amazing ones. Apollo, Artemis, Charybdis, Chiron, Kronos, Medusa. Yeah, I told you this is a large pantheon. They're spoiled for choice, but I think overall I actually like the Kronos. This is a rare case where I'll forgo a meta pick like Artemis or Apollo for synergy. While the double hunter comps absolutely work, especially with Matikaras built-in prot shred, I think grabbing a magical ADC in Kronos will help balance out the damage types for the Greek team, and in my opinion, Kronos is heavily underrated in the current meta anyway. For the Greek support, guess what? Yeah, they're spoiled for choice again, with Ares, Athena, Atlas, Charon, and Aphro all being really strong supports at the moment. This is honestly a really hard choice, so I think I'll lean heavily on the synergy here and choose Aphro. I know she's fallen off a little since her dominance in the Season of Hope, but I think Aphro paired with Kronos and Marty in the late game will be disgusting to get through. Going a different direction with an aggressive support to help them through the early game like Ares was also a solid option though. For solo, there are once again many choices, but I think I have to go with Hades here. Like Aphro, he's fallen off a little since his heyday, but is still really strong and wins lane pretty much for free, allowing the team to focus more on getting mid and ADC to late game without worrying about solo too much. Hades just wins. And in the same vein, I think I'm going to go for Arachne for the Greek jungler. There are other solid options like Nemesis if you wanted more late game teamfight potential, or Thanatos for a similar early game dominance, but I think Arachne is overall stronger than Thana right now while serving the same purpose on the team. Get through the early game via jungle and solo so you can win late through Kronos, Marty, and Aphro. So there's your Greek team. Marty mid, Kronos Aphro duo, Hades solo, and Arachne jungle. A really solid team, but that's expected given the sheer size of the Greek Pantheon in SMITE. Get this team to late game and they will dominate. But is Arachne and Hades enough to hold them through? We shall see. Taking a break from the large pantheons though, we have the Hindus up next. With a roster of only 9 gods, how can they do? Well, first up, we have a couple of really good junglers in Kali and Bakasura. Both are really strong at the moment, but Kali is clearly better, so we're gonna go with her. Pretty simple. There's really only one viable mid laner here with Agni, so he's our guy. Rama is sort of mid viable too, but unfortunately he's the only viable ADC for the Hindus, so there you go, he's in the ADC role. Moving into solo though, we have a few more options. Ravan has fallen off a little bit, but is still a really solid solo. Vamana, same story really. Shiva is decent, but probably not better than these two. I think given we already have a Kali and a Rama, I'll go with Ravan in solo to avoid getting too many auto attackers on one team and getting easily countered. And finally for our Hindu support, we have Ganesha or Kumbha, and while the Fat Man has gotten some buffs recently, I think Ganesha simply outclasses him for the most part in the current meta. So there's your Hindu team. Kali jungle, Agni mid, Rama ADC, Ravan solo, and Ganesha support. Given the size of the Pantheon, this ain't half bad at all. Very late game oriented, but that can work especially if they play around Ravan's solo pressure and rotations. But moving on to yet another small Pantheon, and that's the Japanese. With only 8 gods to choose from, how can they fare? Well, we can kick things off strong with Amaterasu in solo lane. She's one of the top solos at the moment, and after her buffs and the introduction of golden gooseberries, she's the obvious choice for us. Support is also pretty cut and dry, as Kuzenbo is the only viable support here unless you count armor, which I'd sort of done, and she's our solo anyway, so Kappa King takes the support role for us. Unless we wanted to go double hunter, Raijin is the only viable mid here as well, but honestly, we're not complaining about having Raijin in the current meta. After his buffs, he's also a top pick in his role. For ADC, we have a few options, options in Danza, Izanami, or Hachiman. While I do think Hachi is the strongest overall option in terms of pure power at the moment, I think I'm actually going to go with Izanami, as this team is pretty late game heavy and having a duo lane that can win hard will help them get through the early game. Especially because our jungle pick is going to be Susanoo, another god that doesn't have the best early game, but definitely the best jungler available overall for the Japanese. So that's Japan's team: Amaterasu solo, Kuzumbo support, Raijin mid, Izanami ADC, and Susanoo jungle. Honestly, a very impressive team all things considered, though it was helped out a lot by Ama and Raijin getting considerable buffs recently. Another small to mid-sized pantheon up next in the Mayans, which just has a roster of 10 gods. So I've teased a double hunter comp a couple of times already, but I think for the Mayans it is the first pantheon where it makes the most sense to do so. The only viable mids they have are Ixchel, Kukulkan, and Arpwash, all of which are either bad or just decent in Ixchel's case, so I decided on Amuzan Cab mid for the Mayans, with Xbalanque covering the ADC role for them. In solo we have either Kabrakan or Chak, but since the only real viable support pick here is Kabrakan, we must go with Chak in solo and then the Mayan Mountain of Madness in the support role. Which leaves us with just a jungler to fill, of which there are some decent picks: Awilix, Kamazots, and Hunbats. None of them are earth-shattering in terms of pure power level for the meta, but with a few knockups on the team, Awilix really isn't that great. And out of Kama and Bats, I think I like Bats more on this team. He can form a solid engage core with Kabrakan and Chak and hopefully blow up teamfights with the double hunter from mid and ADC. So there's the Mayan team: AMC mid, Xbal ADC, Chak solo, Kabrakan support, and Hunbats jungle. Honestly, the first team that seems to not really hold up all too well. They do have decent picks for every role, but that's all they are: decent. None of these bar Kabrakan are actually good for the current meta. But maybe that can change with the Norse Pantheon team, as they are the second largest pantheon in the game behind Greek. So from the start, I had a grand plan with this team, and it starts with Fafnir in the support role. I know it's not the best support at the moment, but he did get buffed recently, and honestly, the other support offerings in Norse aren't that great. Ymir or Hel are the only two other good ones, so Fafnir it is. And to complement that Fafnir, I'm going with Freya in the ADC role. She's strong in the meta and has great synergy with Fafnir's Coerce for late game teamfights, destroying structures and objectives. And to further that sentiment, I'm going with an Ula mid for this team. We can fit in a physical mid because of Freya in the ADC role, and I do think Ula is being a little underrated at the moment after his buffs. For jungle, there's a myriad of great options, with Thor, Rat, Loki, and Fenrir being the main ones. Fen has quite nice synergy in helping the team through the early game and holding people in place for Freya and Ula to shred them with Fafnir too, but I just can't pass up on Thor for jungle in this meta. He's simply the strongest pick here by a decent margin, and that semi-global presence can also help the team through the early stages. He also plays off of Ula in the mid 2v2 insanely well, as one stun from either of them leads to insane burst on the enemy. And finally, to round off the Norse roster, we need a solo laner. While there are quite a few viable ones, I think Tyr and Yorm are definitely the top picks at the moment. Both do well in lane, but I think having a Yorm that practically can't lose lane will be really nice for getting the core of Freya, Ula, Fafnir to late game, where they can shred anyone and everything. So Yorm it is. Which leaves the Norse roster looking like this: Freya, Fafnir duo lane, Ula mid, Thor jungle, and Yorm solo. A pretty insane team all things considered. Top picks in 3 roles, the Fafnir and the Ula are no slouch either, good synergy and a solid game plan for this team. The next pantheon with more than 5 gods is Roman, with an offering of 11 total. I think we'll kick things off here with Janus in mid. He's simply the strongest mage available for the Romans. Discordia and Vulcan are fine, but Janus is better. There's really only one viable jungler here in Mercury, but he is solid in this meta, so no real complaints here. Also a cheeky synergy with throwing people into Janus portals for chain CC. The ADC role is also pretty cut and dry, with Cupid is really the only good choice here. To support that ADC though, we do have quite a few options. Terra, Sylvanas, Nox, and Bacchus all fit pretty well. Nox and Terra are about on the same raw power level for support, I would say, though I do like Terra's synergy with Cupid, as she can AoE root people into his ultimate to guarantee the mez, so Terra is for the team. And finally, we need a solo laner. For this, we pretty much have Herc or Bellona. While Bell has been seeing a little bit of play lately, I think Herc is still overall stronger and fits quite well into the comp we've drafted here. If someone gets Herc pulled in, they're eating Merc Dash into Janus Portal into Terrastone into Cupidal. They're dead at that point. So that's the Romans: Janus mid, Merc jungle, Cupid Terra duo lane, and Hercules solo. Honestly, better than I thought this would be, given two roles only really have one viable pick, but solid synergy and game plan here, just a bit lacking in terms of top meta picks in some of the roles. And that's actually all the qualifying Pantheon teams, but we have one last squad to make, and that's the Wildcard team, consisting of the remaining Pantheons that lack 5 gods. Yoruba, Voodoo, Slavic, Polynesian, Great Old Ones, Babylonian, and Arthurian. So I think right off the bat, Pele from the Polynesian Pantheon has to go somewhere. She's been seeing a lot of mid play lately, basically as much as jungle, and I have a plan for the jungler, so we're gonna slam Pele in the mid lane for the Wildcard team. The jungler is going to be Maman Brigitte from the Voodoo Pantheon, who just released and seems super strong. She also complements the Pele mid very well by having magical damage as a jungler. For support, I think I'm just going to get it out there that Yemoja from the Yoruba Pantheon is just the best option. There are a few others like Maui who is really good too, but Yemoja is simply best here. For solo, the options aren't looking that great. We're mostly looking at King Arthur, Gilgamesh, Cthulhu, or Baron. I think of all of these, King Arthur is just the strongest overall for the current meta, but screw it. I want Baron and Maman on the same team, so I'm choosing Baron solo. Deal with it. And finally, our ADC for the wildcards. While we do have some solid options in Yoruba's Olorun or Babylon's Ishtar, I think the Slavic Chernobog is simply the best option here. He's arguably top 1 ADC at the moment and unquestionably top 3, so I'm going to go with him. So that's the wildcard team: Pele mid, Maman jungle, Yemoja support, Baron solo, and Cherno ADC. A very strong showing, but that's not too surprising given all these small pantheons add up to actually having 16 gods. The same size as the Norse Pantheon in joint second behind Greek for roster size. This wildcard team has top picks in 3 roles and the new god, who is also probably a top pick in jungle, just a bit early to tell. But with the teams completed, how do they stack up? Let's run that elimination bracket. So with 10 teams, the bracket becomes a little weird and we have to do some first round matches, but since it's single elimination, it shouldn't matter in determining the final winner. So our first matchup on the top left side of the bracket is Egyptian versus Chinese. That's Horus and her duo lane, Set jungle, Thoth mid, and Osiris solo versus Hebo mid, Aokwang jungle, Wukong solo, Naja support, and Jingwei ADC. This is an actual nail biter to kick things off, as both of these teams are amazing and quite evenly matched. The early game probably goes to the Egyptians, especially in the duo lane, but probably in mid too, but as the game goes later on, the Hebo and Aokwang come online big for the Chinese. I think overall, China just ekes out a victory over Egypt in this one, but it was a very close matchup all things considered. So the Chinese team advances to confront Japan in the next portion of the bracket. That's again Hebo mid, Aokwang jungle, Wukong solo, Naja support, and Jingwei ADC, this time versus the Japanese Amaterasu solo, Kuzumbo support, Raijin mid, Izanami ADC, and Susanoo jungle. And despite the roster diff here, I think the Japanese hold up extremely well. They have 3 top picks, arguably 4, and the Izanami is still solid in helping this late game oriented team get off the ground from the duo lane. China also rock an amazing late game though, slightly worse than Japan in my opinion. And actually, I think this is where we bid farewell to China, as I think their duo lane is just a little bit lacking compared to Japan's Izanami Kuzumbo. The Japanese just have the consistently better team with amazing picks in every role. They advance to face the winners of the Norse vs Wildcard in the semi-finals. The other first round matchup on the bottom side of the bracket consists of 2 teams with much smaller offerings. The Hindu team with 9 choices versus the Celtic team with just 5. That's Kali jungle, Agni mid, Rama ADC, Ravan solo, and Ganesha support for the Hindus versus Artio support, Kernanos ADC, Cleaner jungle, Kukulkan solo, and Morrigan mid for the Celts. And I think the smaller roster offering unfortunately just doesn't hold up for the Celts. It's their first time having enough gods to even compete as their own pantheon, but sadly it just doesn't cut it. Their team isn't even bad by any means, but is simply outclassed by the Hindu picks in most roles. So Hindu moves on to face Maya in the next round. So again, that's Kali jungle, Agni mid, Rama ADC, Ravan solo, and Ganesha support versus AMC mid, Xbal ADC, Chak solo, Kabrakan support, and Hunbat's jungle for the Mayans. So I won't sugarcoat it here, I think the Mayan team is honestly weak sauce compared to the Hindus here. Their only arguable top pick is Kabrakan in support, every other pick is just decent, whereas the Hindus have Kali and Ravan, plus the rest of their picks are all solid. They're simply the better team here, enough said. They move on to face the winner of the grudge match, Roman versus Greek, in the bottom side semi-finals. But who will Japan face? Let's find out with the Norse versus Wildcard. So that's Freya Fafnir duo lane, Ola mid, Thor jungle, and Yorm solo for the Norse versus Pele mid, Maman jungle, Yemoja support, support, Baron solo, and Cherno ADC for the Wildcards. And man is this a close one, probably the closest set we've had so far. Both of these teams are incredibly strong, with the only real weak points being the Fafnir and Ula on the Norse side and the Baron on the Wildcards. Baron's matchup into Yom is decent but not great, as his ult doesn't really work there too well. The duo lane definitely goes to the Wildcard in the early game, but later on that Freya with a Fafnir 2 is going to start deleting enemies and objectives. Early game mid goes to Norse cleanly as well. Pele Maman is no slouch, but that Thor-Ula combo means death off of either of their stuns. This one is honestly too close to call, and so I'm going to give it to the Norse team purely because they're an actual single Pantheon team, whereas the Wildcards sort of cheat in a way. I'm only doing this though because it's so hard to choose between these two. If Wildcards were the obviously better team, I would choose them, but the Norse advance to the semi-finals to face the Japanese. But to decide our bottom side semi-finals, we first have to face off the Romans and Greeks. A bit of a grudge match given their Pantheon's similarities to each other. So a refresher, that's Janus mid, Merc jungle, Cupid Terra duo lane, and Hercules solo for the Romans, versus Marty mid, Kronos Afro duo, Hades solo, and Arachne jungle for the Greeks. And sadly, Smite prefers Greek gods to Roman gods, and the larger Pantheon size sort of just wins this one for the Greeks. The Roman team is solid to be fair, but none of their picks are really top notch, they're all just good. Whereas the Greek have some nutty picks like Marty and Arachne, and the rest are solid too. Also a pretty well-rounded team with Hades and Arachne to sort out the early game, while the core of Marty, Kronos, and Afro get to late game where the backliners shred everything in sight while Afro keeps them alive. So the Greeks move on to the bottom side semi-finals where they will face the Hindus. But first, the upper side semis where the Japanese face off against the powerhouse Norse team. For a reminder, that's Freya Fafnir duo lane, Ula mid, Thor jungle, and Yom solo for the Norse versus Amaterasu solo, Kuzan support, Raijin mid, Izanami ADC, and Susanoo jungle for the Japanese. Another ridiculously close matchup. Now that we're down to the final 4 teams, the competition is getting fierce. Both teams are aiming for late game here, with the Norse playing off of mid a lot more due to the strong Ula-Thor combo as well as the Yom in solo, while the Japanese will play more on the duo side, with Izanami definitely winning that against Freya in the early portion. The Japanese have a slightly stronger overall late game teamfight, I would say, but Norse has the objective and structure shred on lock, with Fafnir's Dragon Form coerce onto Freya and Ula. So it really comes down to who can get snowballing and execute their game plan first. Can the Norse get pressure in mid and translate that into early Gold Furies and Fire Giants with their shred, or can the Japanese play through the duo lane and force fights that they probably win in the early to mid game? Again, this is ridiculously close and either of these two could take it, but I really feel like the Norse team is overall more balanced and that insane objective presence could be abused to get a lead in the early to mid game and snowball it to a win. So there you have it, the Norse team moves on to the finals, but who will meet them there? Well, let's see. On the bottom side, we have the Greeks with Marty mid, Kronos Afro duo, Hades solo, and Arachne jungle, versus the Hindus with Kali jungle, Arachne mid, Rama ADC, Ravan solo, and Ganesha support. So while the Hindu team has made it far with such a small roster to choose from, I think the semi-finals is where they fall. The Greek team here is just overall stronger in pretty much every role, and has a more cohesive game plan of playing through solo and jungle to get to late game with the double ADC comp and Afro. Not really that close to be honest, but credit to the Hindus for getting this far on a base roster of only 9 gods. And that leaves us with our 2 finalists, the strongest 2 single Pantheon teams Smite has to offer in 2023. From the top side of the bracket, fighting through the Wildcards and the Japanese, we have the Norse team, Freya Fafnir duo lane, Ula mid, Thor jungle, and Yom solo. And the challengers from the bottom side of the bracket, fighting through their arch rivals the Romans, and honestly stomping over the Mayans, we have the Greek team, consisting of Marty mid, Kronos Afro duo, Hades solo, and Arachne jungle. So interestingly, both of these teams turned out to have a very similar game plan. Get to late game with a double ADC comp and abuse that to win. Norse have the Fafnir to amp up the Freya Ula combo, while the Greeks have Afro to keep the Kronos and Marty alive through it all. The Marty and Arachne mid jungle for the Greeks is the first one that can really compete with the Norse powerhouse of Ula and Thor. It's not clear whatsoever, but Marty's poke combined with Arachne's all-in potential if Thor burns his hammer on damage makes this a very volatile early game for mid jungle for both teams. Yom versus Hades is a pretty dead matchup in solo all things considered. Hades can try and push his lead through clear and sustain, but Yom pretty much stops that in his tracks by just being a wall, and I would say Yom is a little bit better for the late game, so solo in general goes to the Norse, I would say. Duo lane is pretty passive for both teams for the most part, with Kronos, Afro, and Freya Fafnir both just looking to get to late game and pray the rest of their team don't feed. The Norse duo will have more overall damage output in fights, but how on earth do you kill Kronos with an Afro link in the late game? It's a tough call for this one, really tough. It's genuinely hard to draw lines between these teams without splitting hairs, so I think I'm going to give it to the Greeks purely on the fact that they have more overall top picks. The Ulla and Fafnir have amazing synergy with the rest of the team for the Norse, but aren't really top picks in themselves, whereas the Greeks only have one non-top pick in Kronos, who honestly I think is undervalued at the moment anyway. So there you go, the Greeks take it all, with Norse in extremely close second. Third would obviously go to the Japanese, who are incredibly strong given their roster size, but lost out to the Norse. And then fourth goes to Maya, through mainly because of how the bracket was arranged. The actual fourth strongest team here was definitely the Wildcards. They were arguably stronger than Japanese too, to be honest. It's just how the bracket turned out. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it's a remake of an old one, but a lot has changed since I made that video back in 2020. The meta has shifted, the Celts became eligible with Cleaners released in 2021, and I decided to put the rest into a Wildcard Pantheon 2 to make 10 teams. What do you guys think about the result? Was Greek the actual strongest team, or would you have put a different one coming out on top? Let me know down below, and I'll catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.